So we're going to be talking about the importance of pre-recording your episodes, how far in advance you would like to pre-record, what you need for backup recordings just in case you need to use them, and how it can help your workflow to improve success for your podcast. Tune in.
This is the Podcast in the Rough. Tune in every Friday for new adventurous episodes.
Welcome back to the Podcast on the Rough. I'm your host, Zebulon Thomas, and this is episode 122. Today, we're going to be talking about the importance of pre-recording episodes, how far in advance you can get with your episodes, like what's appropriate, and having some for the rainy days, right? And the pros and cons to preloading your podcast in advance and how not to get disconnected, I should say, because that's important. Speaking of which, if you noticed, I've missed a week of podcasting. I do apologize for that. And that's because I did not have one in the can. I did not have a backup episode to produce for you. And the reason I couldn't produce one last week is because I had caught a cold, a nasty cold. And it wasn't that I was too sick to do the episode. It's just I don't like to hear myself all congested. And so I wanted to wait to get the congestion out of my nose, right, so that I can actually speak. And also my throat, right? It was just hard to talk without having to clear my throat. So I wanted to give you guys something professional that you can listen to. And I felt it was just more important to wait and not give you an episode. So that's why I didn't do it. But if I had an episode pre-recorded, I would have been good. I would have been okay. So just in case you fall in this same situation, right? You don't have an episode recorded. Here is what you can do. Here's what I did. What I did is I still took to social media to let my followers know and my listeners and my subscribers, wherever I post a podcast, I said, hey, there's no episode this week. But I started a conversation by resurfacing an older episode on social media and pulling micro clips from those previous episodes to build a conversation starter and to point out some things that maybe my new listeners have missed. Maybe they didn't go back and listen to those episodes. And so I want to talk about that because it's very important. A lot of you have not been resurfacing your older content. And just real quick, don't forget that as you grow, there's new people coming in and following and listening to your episodes that are unaware of your earlier episodes. I have some gems that go way back, and you can't expect them to scroll through and find those older episodes and binge listen to your episodes. So the best way to drive traffic to those previous episodes is by cutting up micro content and then sharing a link saying, want to listen to the full episode, click here. And that's effective because it's very easy to resurface an older episode, or even going back and cutting up those older episodes and making an entirely new episode, combining all of the topics throughout previous episodes that actually went better together. You might have several topics that are the same that you've touched base on in a different viewpoint, different angle, different strategy, or different conversation that could actually be all cut up and put into a whole new episode that is like a power episode about that same topic. So think about that because that could be something really good to preload. The pros and cons of pre-recording your episodes. Now, if you haven't done this yet, this is something that I tried to do for season 3 before I rebooted it. And what I experienced was something that I thought was going to be helpful, and it actually became destructive, and it just didn't work for the podcast. It just didn't help me at all. And so I want to help you avoid those pitfalls. But I also want to encourage you to do some pre-recording. What I did early on is I said, I don't want to give the podcast a lot of time. That's the first mistake you can make. If you're doing a podcast, be committed to it and spend some time on it. Your listeners will appreciate it. It'll shine through the microphone in all your episodes, and it'll just also give you something to commit to on a weekly, monthly basis. Pre-recording is important, especially if you're working with guests, because sometimes your guests fall through, and you might be all ready to go for this guest, even up to that day. So one of the pros of having a pre-recorded episode is that if you have a guest that you want to interview and something comes up and they can't make it to the interview, you're not left alone. You can then switch gears, and if you've done some pre-promotion, you just say, hey, we're moving this episode to a later date. Until then, we have an episode ready for you. Don't miss it. And you can still give hype to that new episode. And then you just load that episode up, and it takes like 5-10 minutes, and you're good to go because you preloaded this episode. Early on, what I wanted to do with season 3 was preload an entire year of episodes, in which I started to attempt. So I knew that I was going to do season 3. I was about 4 or 5 months out before season 3 kicked in. And so I started recording every single day episodes. Now, the first 10 episodes, pretty solid stuff. I was excited. And then after that, the episodes became very washed out. And then I started shortening them because I felt, well, maybe they're too long. So I kept some short ones in there. Then I did some interviews with some guests, had them ready to go. The pro to this was, the goal was to have a lot of pre-recorded episodes so that I could just focus on the marketing concept and the marketing campaigns and all the writing and the comments as I build the podcast, and just know that the episodes are pre-recorded and they could just go out. Also, I wanted to make sure that I knew in advance the topics I had, that I could also look at the market and what's going on, and if there's special events or things that was kicking off. A lot of these topics could fall into play because at the time my podcast was kind of a granola podcast, talked about anything. And so I had a bunch of little buckets, if you will, of content episodes that were ready to go. But the con part of this whole thing was, first off, I got burnt out really, really quick, and I didn't want to do it anymore. And then I had a negative association with my podcast. So you don't want to get burnt out. Second of all, I got disconnected from the podcast because then it was like I did so much in advance. I was ready to put these episodes out that I really wasn't committed to the podcast. I really wasn't deeply involved like I thought I would, even though I was going to be doing all the marketing and I was getting all the, the emails ready and the social media post. And again, I just kind of, because of the burnout, I felt disconnected and I just didn't feel like I had a quality podcast anymore. And it wasn't spontaneous. It didn't really fill me up. Like, it didn't juice me up and get me excited to go on the episode and do a new one like I do today. I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. So that's kind of the pros and cons of pre-recording your episodes. But I want you to take all this in because I'm not saying not to pre-record. So much more value in pre-recording your episodes that will help you get ahead as well and ensure your success. So even though some cons to this, let me show you how to avoid the burnout, the disconnect, and having a stale podcast. So one of the things you want to do is, yes, write down, like on a Google Doc or something, all the ideas throughout the week that you might have. And this is something that I do now, but that becomes my episode. And instead of making a big, long episode, try breaking those episodes up. So you might have all these ideas and they make a good show. But it'll make an even better show if you micro that down into like a 5 or 10 minute episode instead of a 30-minute to an hour episode. And that's one of the things that I've been testing right now. I found out that it's really, really beneficial to my viewers and it's good. And it also really helps me hyper-focus on one subject and give you like the good stuff. Now, this might be a little more challenging when you have a guest on because there's conversation there. You want to make good content, okay? So let's just say you're going to pre-record a bunch of episodes. Start off with doing, 3 or 4, and those 3 or 4 have to be neutral. There's no timestamp, no date, no episode number spoken inside the episode. And these are just used as a backup. Find your best ones, the juiciest episodes you have that you're like, oh, this is so good, but don't release it. Do not release it. Save that for the rainiest day that you have, the most challenging week that you might have, that you're like, there is no way I can get an episode out, and missing a week is just not going to be a thing that I can do. It's okay to miss a week, okay, with your episode. It happens. But if you feel like, hey, we've got a lot of traction, we're growing, we just don't want to let our viewers down, and resurfacing is not going to be a thing, then this is the one we put in there. When you treat those 3 or 4 episodes you have pre-recorded like that, this really makes you work harder on all the episodes surrounding that. So set the stage. And now that you know, hey, I always got this one in the can and it's amazing. Let's make all these other ones just as good. The more you resist defaulting to that episode as to put it out, it's going to make you work harder, and then you're going to be able to create extra ones. So maybe you start off with 3 or 4, but by the time mid-year happens, you got 6 or 7 as a backup. You really don't need that many as a backup. I think 4 is ideal because, unless you're really, really busy, you should be able to do a podcast, even if it's just 3 to 5 minutes. And remember, it doesn't take much to put this together. Speak on something speak on the topic you're talking about. Give your viewers and your listeners that content that they deserve, that they really enjoy, right? Even start a conversation. Don't fill it up with a lot of ads just because you don't have a lot of content. Don't fluff it up with unnecessary stuff. Really get to the point and really give them something of value. whatever that is. And so have these pre-recordings, and this is how you don't get disconnected or burned out. Because if you do these recordings in advance, now you have 4 episodes that you have to edit. And I highly encourage that if you're going to pre-record these episodes, that you actually edit them and they're completely ready to go. Now, the one thing I would refrain from, if you're not 100% set on your intro theme music or your outro theme music, then maybe don't put that on these episodes. So if anything, you might have minimal editing. And that is like, oh, we can't do an episode because, you're sick or you're busy. And you're like, hey, I just need to throw an intro and outro on the back of this. We have that ready to go with the new stuff. Or edit it in a way where if you needed to make adjustments, you can cut those off. That hasn't been an issue for a lot of the people I know and the people that have helped build their podcast. I'm just saying that because it could be something. Because I change my intro music or I shorten it over a period of time. And if you're looking at these to be like a last resort, you could be using these towards the end of the year. And so you evolve in your episode. You might change the music or might have new graphics. So, edit the audio part of the podcast and have the video one ready to go too. But just know that you might be outdated when you post it. That's why I also say not to put the date, the episode number, or any timestamp on this episode so that when you put it up, it does fall into your episodes and no one knows. But it's very important to pre-record because you don't want to miss the opportunity to be successful because you didn't post content. Podcast is all about staying on schedule, posting great content, and being consistent with it. Your audience that you're working so hard to grow are going to show up. But if they show up and no one's here and you didn't tell them about it, then you're going to lose their interest. And it's hard to get them back. But if you have a really good show and you have great content, again, if you can't make a show and you don't have a backup, then find a way to repurpose some of that old content or bring it up and maybe do it just a short episode. Or if you have one of these as a backup, share the backup and then get in the conversations. Don't just share this backup and say, oh, I'm going to let it go. It's auto running. I published it. It's great. I can go back to my day. We always have to stay consistent on social media. So when you post this up, even though it's a backup, make sure you follow through with everything else that you would do on the schedule. Post it to your Instagram, Facebook, wherever else you put this, start the conversation, and you're good to go. So let me also talk to you about if you wanted to pre-record a bunch of interviews with special guests. Now, I find that to be the best opportunity because when you do an episode with someone and you get it pre-recorded, so if I did an interview with someone that was, maybe a mid or high profile person and they have a great following, well, this gives us the opportunity to say, hey, we recorded it last week. We're going to push this next month, but we're all going to put together a nice marketing campaign and we're going to push this to our followers. And we're going to generate a lot of hype and we're going to generate a lot of interest and we're going to really nitpick and pull apart all the micro content in advance so we can use this before the episode comes out. Especially with interviewing someone because you're sharing that social media stage. You're also sharing the following. Their following is going to come to you and your following is going to go to them. And it really brings the followings together. And so you grow your community. And that's a really big advantage of interviewing guests. And it doesn't mean they have to be like a celebrity, but they just have to have some interest to fits into your demographic and what your podcast is about. And so it's really important to find the right people to interview on your show. So simply just find like-minded people that really will resonate with your episode, with your following and your listeners, and bring them on. And you can even turn to your community and ask them, who would you like me to interview on yada yada topic, right? And then get that feedback, and then you can use that to reach out to these individuals and say, hey, a big majority of my listeners, when I ask who I should interview on this podcast, they want you on. And it makes them feel special. And we'll get into this later on in another episode about how to really book yourself on someone's podcast or get someone to be a guest on your show. And all the different ways you can do it in person, through the internet, through like Zoom or through Riverside or all these different incredible podcast platforms and how to get the best quality. We'll talk about that because it's really important. It's something I've done a lot. And over the years of doing it for companies, I know a lot of them had to just run it through and just get it. But I was always obsessed about getting the right quality audio because why not? We had the funding, we had the opportunities, we had the time. Do it. Get it done. So there's some shortcuts I found that to be very effective for you that are not that expensive, if not free. A lot of it's free. It's just cleaning up the audio a little bit, just giving the other person that, especially if you're doing it through a Zoom, the right settings for your software and your microphones to really give you the extra quality that you deserve. And so does your listeners. Now, with guests, it is important to interview guests on your show because, again, not only does that bring people together, but the algorithm likes it because now there's 2 accounts that are sharing and there's the following that are sharing 2 different accounts on these episodes. And so it'll really boost you on social media and the growth of your podcast. It's one of the fastest ways to grow on YouTube and with a podcast is having guests on your show because it's just a great conversation and it's the classic interview style. It's awesome to be able to interview people and just have the right interview questions is key. Now, let's just say you're not interviewing guests and you're just basically preloading episodes. Here's the other pro thing that you should do right away if you're preloading episodes and you're not going to use them as backups and you really just say, hey, I do want to get, a couple months ahead. So once you get these all recorded, take the time to edit them, but also take the time to cut out the micro content because now that you have the time, you can really go through and cut the juiciest stuff out of that. And also you can then build not just micro content to go up on social media as like short little clips that has a link to the full episode and to give your podcast a promotional boost. But now you also have the opportunity to turn this into a newsletter. And if you have been growing a mailing list, then you can send this out in a mailing list and you can build an entire, it could be a course, it could be an uplifting, motivational piece of content in a newsletter that has a video clip attached to it. You can use this as a great starter into something you're trying to grow and build and sell later to your following, to your community. And you can also use this as pre-release content. So now if you have pre-recorded episodes, you might want to start something like, like I have like a Buy Me a Coffee or a Patreon and say, if you become a member, you get access to our episodes, a day or a week before they're released. And now it's very easy to contribute to that content because it's already recorded. They know it's there. You can preload this into those platforms like a Patreon or a Buy Me a Coffee. And the people can go and look at it and be like, oh man, I can access, this episode coming out right now if I just become a member and give them that premium content. And they'll appreciate that. And then you can go far and beyond by adding a lot of stuff to your episodes because when they're pre-recorded, it also spins you into a new way of thinking about your podcast. Because if I've recorded 5 or 6 episodes up front and I know the direction we're going, now I can really look at my podcast, a couple months in advance and go, wow, this is kind of what it's going to look like in 5 months. And when I look at it at that level, I go, well, dude, like how do I want to have this whole thing look in the whole year? Because we don't sometimes look at our podcast that much out because we're recording this on a weekly basis. So we're like, oh, what's good for this week? Or what's good for this week and next week? So start looking at your podcast in the way of building a campaign, if you will. What is your podcast campaign going to look like? What does the next 7 or 8 episodes look like? How does it take the listeners from start to the finish? What kind of journey does it take them through? And so when you start looking at podcasts like this, it really does change the dynamics of your podcast. Trust me, I have like 50 episodes pre-recorded that will never come out because they don't fit this season anymore. Like they have too much on it, right? It's just not right. But that doesn't mean that they can't become micro content. And so now I've been filtering a lot of that micro content into, other opportunities. I might meet someone with health and wellness they got going on, and I might pull from that to talk about it at a seminar, or I might pull for that to put as a preload package to a seminar to let people know this is the type of stuff that I cover. Here's some freebies that we put together for the event. It's not been heard before. We're going to touch base on this, and I could build from that. So there's always an opportunity. You won't make the content go to waste. It just might not be used the way it was intended at the beginning. And vice versa. Your episode now for whatever season you're on, like I'm on season 3. So all this content that I'm creating now, when I go back through this, there's going to be a lot of gold nuggets I can cut from this and make micro content, but also that will also it could turn into a course for me. It could turn into a book because I'm a published author. So I might convert all this into a really amazing book. And I did talk about that a few episodes back about turning your podcast into a book. But this could also turn into just like a great seminar, and the best of the best. And then I bring guests in on this to talk about the same subject and topics that I did. And it could turn out to something big. And that's where you get into entrepreneurship. But, again, I don't know what you're using your podcast for. Is it personal? Is it business? Is it, a hobby? Is it you just trying to get a message out there, you're trying to talk? Find a way to control this to a point where it's not just something you're jumping in the vehicle and you're driving. Like you're getting in the vehicle, you know what speed you're going to drive, you know how fast you're going to get there, you know where you're going, and the adventure from A to B is going to be exciting. And anybody that you meet along the way, you're going to tell them about it. And hopefully you arrive at your destination with a whole bunch more people than what you started with, right? To me, that's a successful mission, okay? So you want to make sure that you put your podcast together in a way that tells a story and brings the viewers in and gives them something to talk about, and also gives your podcast value because of the transformation or the topic or the story or the hero's journey, or leading them up to a call to action. That could be a course you're going to sell, and you're building that community. What is your podcast for? How does it deliver? And why would people want to be a part of that? You want to make it so juicy that people feel like they're missing out if they're not a part of your episode. Like for me, I like to be very organic. I don't like to push too much of my podcast out there. I want people to find it and go, oh, that's for me. But I have to be very clear on my message and very clear on my micro content. So when you see it's posted up there, I'm not really pushing it as hard as I could be. Like literally like 3% of how I could be. I'm just putting 3% effort into that because I want it to be out there. But again, I want it to slow grow, and I'm also developing my style even more. Even though I'm in the third episode, I'm still developing my style as a podcaster. And even my topic, like right now I'm talking about how to podcast because that's something I know a lot about. I just did a whole bunch of it and I'm geeking out over it. So I like to talk about that. And recently I've helped a lot of people, and I love the way it's growing inside of a Facebook group. By the way, if you have not subscribed to my Facebook group or joined it, it's absolutely free. Head on over to thepodcastintherough.com/learn to get access to my private Facebook group. And also, I would like to encourage you to get the premium content and head over to buymeacoffee.com/intherough. So on the Buy Me a Coffee, your contributions help support the podcast show. And the premium content is going to be helpful for you if you're looking to advance into your next level. Maybe that's in business. Maybe you have a personal goal, a spiritual goal. Maybe you need some mental health advice. Maybe you want to hear some motivation. Maybe you want to hear next level ideas that I have not used that could be good for you. Or maybe you just want to hear a conversation that is just flowing when I'm in my peak state, if you will. So I share a lot of episodes on there of me having some really deep talks. They're some are short, some are long, and they touch base on a lot of topics that I can't really share on the podcast here because it just wouldn't fit my market. I'm getting more into helping people as a coach. I used to be a life coach. And so I figured, you know what, that's a good thing that I want to bring to this podcast, just not on the show. And so it's my premium content. And what's nice about that is there's a lot of opportunity for you to really reach your next level goals by listening to some of the ideas that I've been sharing inside these episodes on my Buy Me a Coffee. So check out my Power Talks on my buymeacoffee.com/intherough. Those are great episodes. And there's a new one that just got uploaded, so don't miss it. It is a juicy one. It's good. It's great. It's amazing. Again, I'm in my peak state when I'm either working out, exercising, walking through the park, and I get these phenomenal ideas, and I'm just like, when you go to the woods or you go somewhere and you ground and you like get away from the craziness and you really just get this complete clarity and you're just like, wow, this is it. And then the energy and the juices flow and all the ideas, and you just, that's where you're banging your head against the wall and you're just like, I got to have a breakthrough. I got to move forward. I got to do this, got to do that. And you really just let a lot of stuff go and you go, I need to be guided or I need to guide. And that's what those episodes are about, my Power Talks. So definitely check that out. You're not going to be disappointed, I promise. But also check out those outlets because, again, we're talking about podcasting here and how to do that. And if you're preloading your episodes, you can use that as well as an opportunity to build out your Buy Me a Coffee, your Patreon, or wherever else you're putting this to give them premium content and generate a little bit more money around your podcast. And we've talked a little bit how you can monetize this podcast. And I'm all about monetizing in the way of creating a product, a services, and really pushing that on your podcast and doing your own commercials so you have 100% independency on your podcast and there's not a lot of hands in the pot, if you will. And then from there, you can, if you're not really good at that entrepreneurship yet, and you're not really good at business and marketing and stuff, well, then you can say, I'm going to grow this audience and just focus on building a community and audience first. And then hopefully the platform itself will let me monetize my podcast and I'll make some money on it. But don't wait for the platforms anymore, because they're big corporate people and there's a lot of restrictions. And then there's just a lot of, hands in a pot there, and you do not get the better end of that deal. So it's better to build your own community, build your own platform, products and services, and then take action with call to actions and keep it 100% you. And then you don't have any hands in the pot, and you have this beautiful community that is willing and able and ready for your content and your words and your services, and they want to support you, and that is beautiful. So, and that's what I want you all to develop and have, because I've built this for so many people. You might think you need 1,000 members, but you really only need 20, 30, maybe even 100. And having that community really tight, really responsive, really communicating with you, you can literally just, you don't have to go anywhere, right? Like you're just focused in this little bubble, this community you've built, and you're feeding everybody, and they're feeding you, and you're thriving, right? And then you have this product and service they introduce, and they're a part of that development, and they feel so connected. And from there, that is how you become super successful in so many different ways. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned next week for another great episode that I do not have pre-recorded, but they are coming. The pre-recording's coming, but it's still going to be a good one because I do have some show notes and I'm ready and I'm building something awesome for next week. So I'll talk to you then. Take care. This is the podcast in the rough.